I don't remember the first time I noticed her. Not exactly. Maybe it was the way her curtains were always half drawn, as if she wanted light, but didn't trust the world to see her fully. Or maybe it was that evening last winter when I carried groceries up the stairs, and she held the door open, her hand resting on the frame just long enough for me to feel like she was holding me, too. Her name is Claire. She lives across the hall from me, apartment 3B. I'm in 3A. She's in her 40s, though if you asked me to guess, I'd fumble between numbers because age doesn't fit her. She has this quiet elegance, not polished, but lived in, like the spine of a book read too many times. Tonight wasn't supposed to happen. I'd only knocked to return her mail, a dull white envelope that had slipped into my box. Nothing more. But she opened the door in an oversized sweater, her hair a little messy, and the smell of chamomile tea drifted out. "You could have just slid it under the door," she said, smiling faintly. "I know," I answered, holding it out. "But I thought maybe you'd want to know it arrived." She hesitated, then stepped back. "You can come in for a minute, if you want." That was hours ago. Her apartment was warmer than mine, filled with low lamps and the faint hum of an old record player that wasn't playing anything. We sat at her small kitchen table, mugs in hand. She talked more than I expected, about books stacked on her counter, about how the neighbors downstairs never stopped fighting, about how chamomile always reminded her of her grandmother. I listened, maybe too closely. Her hands kept wrapping and unwrapping around her mug, her knuckles pale in the lamplight. Sometimes she looked at me, sometimes she didn't. But when she did, it felt longer than it should. I told her about my job, unsteady shifts, late nights. She laughed at something I said, then quickly looked away as if she regretted giving me that much. Silence slipped in, heavier than the tea between us. I should have left then. I knew it. The clock on her wall ticked louder, reminding me how long I'd overstayed. "It's late," she finally said, her voice soft, but edged with something else. "You should go." I could have nodded, could have stood up, thanked her for the tea, and gone back to my apartment like nothing happened. But my hand didn't move from the mug. My chest felt tight, my throat drier than the air should have made it. "Not until you say stop," I heard myself reply. Her eyes flicked up, startled, searching my face for something. Maybe arrogance, maybe recklessness. I gave her neither. Just the truth, laid bare. For a moment, she didn't breathe. At least it seemed that way. She leaned back slightly, lips parting as if she had words but wasn't ready to release them. My pulse hammered in my ears, filling the silence. The hum of the refrigerator grew louder, the light overhead buzzed. She reached for her sweater sleeve and pulled it down over her wrist, as though covering herself from something unseen. Then, the sudden trill of her phone on the counter. A text message lighting up the dark screen. Her gaze broke from mine. Her hand hovered over the phone, trembling just slightly, before she looked back at me, eyes wide, uncertain. And in that suspended second, everything between us tilted, as if the ground itself had shifted. The phone buzzed again before she touched it. The screen flashed, then dimmed, then flashed again. Whoever it was, they weren't giving up. Claire finally picked it up, thumb hovering. I pretended not to notice, but it was impossible to ignore the way her jaw tensed, the way her shoulders stiffened as she read. She set the phone down without replying. "Persistent," I said quietly. She let out a breath, a sound closer to a sigh than laughter. "It's no one important." But her eyes betrayed her, that quick flicker of something unspoken. I didn't press. Instead, I leaned back in the chair, gripping my mug though the tea had gone cold. "You don't have to explain." She looked at me then, sharp, like she wasn't sure if that was comfort or accusation. After a beat, her gaze softened. "I've had people in my life who don't understand boundaries." The words hung there, too heavy for the space. I wanted to ask more, but my own history stirred in me. Messy nights, a string of girls my age who never wanted more than distraction, my parents' fractured marriage still echoing in my head. I'd never told anyone, but I was tired of shallow connections. Tired of conversations that dissolved as soon as the night ended. Something about sitting across from Claire, the steadiness in her voice, the careful way she carried herself, made me ache in a place I couldn't name. She must have sensed it, because she tilted her head slightly, studying me. "You're young. You should be out with friends, not stuck here listening to me complain." "Maybe I like being stuck here," I said before thinking. Her lips pressed together, not quite a smile, not quite disapproval. You don't know what you're saying. Maybe I do. She looked away, down at her hands. Her fingers twisted the edge of her sleeve again, the fabric already stretched thin. This is risky. The word carried weight, more than she probably intended. Risky because of the years between us. Risky because neighbors don't usually blur these lines. Maybe risky because of whoever kept texting her. And yet she didn't tell me to leave again. I found myself leaning forward, elbows on the table. You ever think about missed chances? Her eyes lifted slowly to mine, and something in her expression cracked, just for a moment. All the time. Silence stretched, softer this time, less like distance and more like something wrapping around us both. I wanted to reach across, to take her hand. I didn't. Instead, I let my fingers trace circles on the rim of my mug, hoping she'd see the question in that small movement. She did. Her hand twitched, then stilled. But she didn't pull away. For the first time, I noticed the record player humming faintly, a low static, like a song waiting to begin. Neither of us moved, neither of us spoke. But in the quiet, the air thickened, as though we were already sharing something that couldn't be undone. And then, she reached across, not to hold my hand, but to slide the cold mug out of my grip, her fingers brushing mine longer than necessary. Her fingers slid from mine, but the trace of her touch lingered, warm against my skin. She stood, gathering our mugs as if distance could erase what had just happened. I should, she began, her back to me, rinsing cups that didn't need rinsing. But before she finished, a sharp knock rattled the door. Her body stiffened. Mine too. Another knock, louder this time. Claire, a man's voice, muffled but clear through the wood. You home? She froze, water still running over porcelain. My chest tightened. I mouthed the question, who? Her lips barely moved. Don't. She pressed a finger to her lips, eyes wide, almost pleading. The knock turned into a rhythm, impatient. Claire, come on. Open up. She cut the water, wiped her hands quickly, and whispered, stay quiet. The air felt razor thin. I could hear my own pulse. After a long pause, the man sighed, heavy, frustrated. Then footsteps retreated down the hall. The silence that followed was worse than the knocking. I finally whispered, who was that? She kept her back to me, shoulders slumped. My ex. He still thinks, she shook her head. It doesn't matter. But it did matter. The way she said it, half truth, half shield, not at me. Is he the one who keeps texting you? Her silence was an answer. I should have left right then, spared us both. But my legs didn't move. My eyes followed her every gesture. The way she leaned on the counter, the way her hands trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it. She finally turned to face me. You shouldn't be here. I know. My voice was low, steadier than I felt. But I am. Her eyes softened, conflicted, like she wanted to push me away and pull me closer at the same time. I stood slowly, closing the space between us. Not touching, just near enough to feel her warmth. You don't understand, she whispered. This isn't simple. I've made mistakes before. Big ones. And I can't. Her voice broke. She pressed her palm against the counter, grounding herself. I leaned closer, just enough that I could see the tiny crease between her brows, the faint shadow of fatigue under her eyes. Then don't, I murmured. Don't make this a mistake. For a heartbeat, she didn't move. Our faces so close the air between us seemed to pulse. Her breath hitched. My hand twitched at my side, fighting the urge to reach for her. Then, her phone lit up again, buzzing angrily on the counter. The same name. She flinched. The spell broke. She grabbed the phone, turned it face down, and whispered, almost to herself, this has to stop. But her gaze didn't leave mine, and the tremor in her voice betrayed her. Because neither of us was ready to stop. The silence stretched after her whispered, this has to stop. But neither of us moved. I could feel her restraint like a wall between us, brittle and ready to crack. My chest tightened. The thought of walking out, of leaving her in this half-lighted kitchen with someone else's name flashing on her phone, it clawed at me. Is he still in your life? I asked, my voice rougher than I meant. She flinched at the question. Not the way you think. He doesn't belong here anymore. Then why does he keep showing up? Her eyes closed briefly, like the weight of years pressed behind her eyelids. Because I let him, once. For too long. She opened them again, steady now. And because he doesn't take no the way a person should. The words burned in my chest. I wanted to say I'd stay, that I'd stand between her and anyone who tried to cross her boundaries. But what right did I have? A neighbor barely out of his 20s. Still, the thought of her ex, of anyone else claiming pieces of her, tightened something inside me, sharp and unfamiliar. Jealousy wasn't the right word. It was closer to fury, threaded with fear. You deserve better than that, I said, too quickly. Better than someone who. She cut me off, her voice low, trembling. Don't say it. The words froze on my tongue. She stepped closer then, maybe without realizing, her sweater brushing against my sleeve. I could smell the faint trace of chamomile still clinging to her. Her hand lifted, hesitated, then dropped again, lost in the air between us. You don't understand, she whispered. You're young. You'll wake up one day and hate yourself for being here with me. I shook my head, stepping closer until I could see the uneven rise of her breath. That's not true. Don't lie to yourself. I'm not. Her jaw tightened. She turned her head slightly, as if avoiding my eyes would protect her. But when she spoke again, her voice cracked. You make me feel seen, and that terrifies me. The words struck something deep. My hand lifted before I could stop it, hovering just above hers on the counter, barely touching. Then let it terrify you, I said. Because I can't stop. Her eyes snapped back to mine, wide, vulnerable, desperate. For a second, neither of us breathed. The pull between us was raw, undeniable, and terrifying in its own right. Her lips parted, not with words this time, but with the weight of something unsaid. My pulse roared in my ears. And then, a sharp knock at the door. Both our heads turned, the spell shattered. The sound came again, louder. She looked at me, panic flashing in her eyes. And in that split second, the knock came again, sharper this time. Claire's hand gripped the edge of the counter. Don't move, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But the door creaked open anyway. Someone had a key. A man stepped inside. Older than me, maybe late 40s, with the kind of presence that filled the room before his voice did. His eyes swept the kitchen, landing on me almost immediately. What the hell is this? Claire went pale. Mark, her voice broke. You can't just, who is he? Mark's tone was deceptively calm, but the way his jaw clenched made my stomach knot. I opened my mouth, but Claire's quick shake of her head stopped me cold. He's a neighbor, she said too quickly. He was just leaving. The words stung, sharper than I expected. Just leaving. Like I was nobody. Like the hours we'd spent unraveling ourselves across mugs of tea meant nothing. But Mark didn't look convinced. His eyes narrowed, flicking between us. He stepped closer to Claire, lowering his voice. You said you needed space. Not this. Space. My gut tightened. She hadn't told me the whole truth. Claire stood straighter, though her hands trembled. I do need space. That's why you shouldn't be here. He let out a humorless laugh. And yet here I am, watching you entertain kids half your age. The words hit like a slap. My fists curled at my sides, but I forced myself still. Claire's lips parted, but nothing came out. Her silence said everything. And in that silence, something inside me cracked. She hadn't lied, not exactly, but she hadn't told me she was still entangled in whatever this was. I took a step back, the distance suddenly suffocating. You should have told me, I said, my voice low but shaking. Her eyes met mine, wide with something like apology, something like desperation. It's not what you think. But Mark cut in, scoffing. Of course it is. Don't kid yourself, kid. She doesn't want you. You're just... Stop, Claire snapped, her voice sharp enough to silence the room. She turned on him, fire in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Don't speak for me. The words hung heavy, shocking even her. Mark stared at her, wounded pride twisting his features, then threw his hands up. Fine. You want your space? Enjoy it. He stormed out, the door slamming so hard the frame rattled. The echo lingered long after he was gone. I stood frozen, the sound of my own breath too loud. Claire pressed her palms to the counter, shoulders heaving. Finally, she looked at me. I'm sorry, she whispered. I shook my head, throat tight. Sorry for what? For him? For me? For us? Her eyes glistened. She didn't answer. Couldn't. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just about risk. This was about a past that still had claws in her. A past she hadn't let go of. I knew. Whatever happened next would change everything. The door was still vibrating from Mark's exit when silence swallowed the room. Claire hadn't moved. Her hands pressed flat to the counter, her head bowed. I watched her shoulders rise and fall in uneven waves, as if every breath cost her something. I wanted to go to her. I wanted to pull her away from the shadow he'd left. But my feet stayed rooted, heavy with the words I hadn't spoken. Finally, she lifted her head. Her eyes found mine, raw and unshielded. You weren't supposed to see that. Then what was I supposed to see? My voice cracked, and I hated how small it sounded. The version where you keep him at arm's length, but let him hold the keys? The version where I'm just a distraction? Her face tightened, wounded, but she didn't look away. You're not a distraction. Then what am I? The question echoed, demanding more than she seemed ready to give. She took a step toward me, then stopped. The distance between us stretched taut like a rope about to snap. She broke off, pressing her hands to her temples. You're the one who makes me forget I'm supposed to be careful. The words hit harder than I expected. My chest ached. Then stop being careful, I whispered. Her eyes widened, as if I'd said something dangerous. You don't understand. I've lived enough life to know how this ends. People judge. They whisper. And you're young enough to have 100 other chances. Why waste one on me? I closed the space between us, my voice steady now. Because none of those chances would be you. The air thickened. Her hand lifted, hovering near my chest, as if testing the heat of a flame. I could feel her trembling. I'm terrified, she confessed, barely audible. So am I. The truth cracked open between us, sharp and unfixable. For a long moment, we just stood there, close enough to feel the pull, far enough that it might still be undone. Finally, she let out a shaky laugh, half a sob. You don't know what you're doing to me. I think I do, I said, softer now. Because you're doing the same to me. Her hand finally touched me. Light, tentative, resting against my shirt as though it might burn through. My own hand rose, covering hers. The contact was small, almost nothing. But it carried everything. We didn't kiss. We didn't promise forever. We just stayed there, holding on, acknowledging the truth we couldn't bury anymore. And in that fragile, terrifying moment, it was enough. When she finally whispered, "Stay," it wasn't a command. It was a plea. I nodded, throat too tight for words. The past still lingered in the walls. The future was uncertain, tangled. But for the first time, we were facing it together, without lies, without masks. Messy, risky. The night stretched longer than it should have. Neither of us moved from the kitchen for a while, our hands pressed together on the counter like we were afraid that letting go meant undoing everything. Eventually, she pulled away gently and whispered, "Come on." We ended up in the living room, sinking into the couch without turning on any lights. The record player still hummed faintly, though no music played. Outside, the hallway was quiet. For once, no knocks, no interruptions. Just us. She tucked her knees under herself, wrapping the sweater tighter, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Something between fear and relief. I've built my whole life on being careful, she said finally. On not giving anyone a reason to look too closely. And then you. She trailed off, shaking her head. You sit at my table and ask me about missed chances. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. Maybe because I don't want to miss this one. Her laugh was soft, broken, but it carried warmth. You don't make it easy to keep my distance. I smiled faintly. Good. The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It was full, like air after a storm. She told me pieces of her past, carefully, like unwrapping fragile things. A marriage that had ended long before she admitted it to herself. Years of letting someone else's needs drown out her own. Mistakes she couldn't erase. Choices that still left shadows. I shared my own pieces, too. How I'd been searching for something real, tired of shallow connections, tired of people who didn't really see me. How being with her, just sitting in her kitchen, felt more honest than anything I'd known before. At one point, our shoulders brushed. Neither of us moved away. By the time the first hint of dawn pressed against the blinds, she turned her face toward me. You realize this isn't going to be easy. I don't care, I said, and I meant it. Her lips curved, not quite a smile, not quite sadness. You might someday. Then I'll deal with it someday. For the first time all night, she didn't argue. Instead, she reached out, threading her fingers through mine. The touch was quiet, steady, a choice made without ceremony. We didn't talk about labels or futures. We didn't plan how to explain ourselves to neighbors, to friends, to anyone who might question us. The only thing we decided, without words, was that neither of us was ready to let go. When I finally stood to leave, the hall outside was washed in pale morning light. She walked me to the door. Her hand lingered on the frame, just as it had the first time she ever held it open for me. I'll see you later? I asked. Yes, she whispered. Then, after a pause, not until you say stop. I smiled, heart pounding. Then I'm not stopping. The door closed softly behind me, but this time, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the beginning we hadn't let ourselves believe in. Il